Okay, everybody, 5 after. Let's go ahead and get started. Standing item number 1, release planning and updates. I believe there was some suggestion last time that we were simply going to remove this since we all just sort of do releases. Is that correct?
Doesn't sound like a totally insane idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we agreed that this had sort of just transferred over from the CMB project, so we'll go ahead and kill it. Next, outstanding RFCs. I'll go ahead and share my screen. There are only 2.5 outstanding. Paketo Buildpacks, there we go. The first one is the proposed Buildpack YAML schema. My recollection of this is that hasn't been talked about in about 30 days. Is there still a desire, given the replacement with the next RFC, to keep this open?
No, I think this is the half. We can round down to 0 and just
Okay.
X this, I think.
Okay, I'll take care of that after this. Replace Buildpack YAML with the build plan Buildpack. We're finally getting quite a number of green checks on here. I don't think there's anything outstanding as people have started taking care of this. I believe the only thing we're missing here is Stephen actually giving this a green check. Is that correct? Okay. Has Stephen joined yet? No?
Just now.
Ah, there you go, Stephen. We are waiting for you to give this a green check, and that's it. The final one is the Paketo Community Charter, which was opened recently. Forrest, do you want to talk about this, even though it's in draft?
Yeah, I just I have a section. I have an item on this. So I'll talk about it really quickly.
Okay. Go ahead and stop this. We can move on to the things, onto the actual agenda. The first one is green builders, and this came from me. Yesterday, the Paketo builder was broken, and Mark and Forrest both jumped on that and got it green again. And it had been pointed out that it appears not everybody thinks this thing's in production and ready to go. And so we haven't been sort of applying the same level of rigor and guaranteed greenness to it. To be honest, whether or not we think it is, it definitely is. Spring Boot shipped a feature a couple of months ago based on top of cloud native build packs. There are, we know of hundreds of applications already going to production based on images, based on our builder. There are thousands more in testing, according to the Boot team, already starting up. So the ship has kind of sailed. And while individual build packs, I don't think are necessarily ready for production, we probably need to consider the builder itself to be a thing that is in production and kept as green as possible. Are there any objections to that?
So maybe this is my misunderstanding. Were those builders that were being produced and causing red, did it just mean that we had an old builder that was out of date with what it was current, or were we actually shipping a broken product?
The former. The biggest issue was that someone had identified a bug and wanted a fix out of some of the Java build packs. And that is the only mechanism effectively that we can get those out to users short of them building their own builders, which no one really wants them to do at this point. So it is the only delivery mechanism for individual build pack fixes today.
So this is more of a statement of we need to keep it green in order to make sure that we're shipping latest changes, not that we're shipping broken things. Okay.
Yeah,
that's fine.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
There have been a couple of times where we've broken builders, either by like removing stack IDs or changing stack IDs. And as soon as we do that, everyone who uses these comes out of the woodwork. Be like, Riff is broken and Spring Boot is broken, and stuff like that. So I think we've fallen into both cases here.
Yeah. Does that mean that we need to spend a little bit more time with our smoke testing as well, or?
Yeah, we've been adding those as we run into these problems. So like as the Relevance team, we don't exactly know the full contract that these builders need to support. Like we kind of discover these labels and things as we go. But as those failures happen, we'll like encode them in test cases to prevent them in the future. But
Yeah.
that being said, it's kind of hard to predict like how it's going to fail next.
Yep, and I totally am on board with that. I think, as Emily pointed out, in the past we had a problem with this. I don't think we have a problem now. This particular failure was just sort of like the CI was not able to create a new image, and we sorted that particular thing out. If we run into another thing that isn't covered by the smoke test, I'm totally aware that that means there'll be an unanticipated breakage, and we'll add some smoke tests in and make sure everything gets sorted out for the time following that. I don't feel this need to put in a huge amount of effort to predict what failure cases we might run into in the future.
One thing we've been talking about on the release engineering side is, that the team may recharter a bit to be more focused on creating tools, like looking at the operating system package install use cases, things like that. And builders were outlined as one of the things that we're not sure if it makes sense on the release engineering side, because it's kind of like release engineering sitting in front of shipping build packs to a place. Maybe it's worth talking about whether it makes more sense for the feature eng team and or together with Ben Hale and the Java build pack team to own shipping builders.
Yeah, like I fundamentally don't have an issue with that. I just want to make sure that builders can go out as necessary.
Makes sense. I just thought I'd bring it up more generally. Wanted to see if people had thoughts. Seems like we'll figure it out. If Avalanche decides it's less in their charter, then we'll see if it works out to move it somewhere else.
Cool. Forrest, then, first Paketo community charter draft.
You're muted first.
Like I was saying, I'll just share my screen really quickly and do a quick walkthrough. Y'all should go in and still read it, obviously, if that's something that you feel particularly passionate about. It still needs some polish on it, which is why it's a draft. But once that's sort of figured out, I will put it into an actual state to be sort of ready. So this RFC focuses mainly around what I feel, and having done a little bit of temperature testing around the team feels the Paketo community should be like responsible for and hold. So it's mainly the statement around that the Paketo community is like a trusted place for community created build packs to be hosted that allows a user who is using the Paketo build packs but needs extension to search for what we say is a safe and trusted package that is outside of our core offering. I think the prior art is like pretty important here. It's stuff like Apple and PPA. So this is Red Hat's package offering that's outside of our standard Red Hat distribution, and PPA is obviously Ubuntu's. So that's like the model I'm trying to go for, is a set of packages that are not just whatever's downloaded off the internet, but a set of packages that have trusts and sort of somewhat guarantees around them as well. So in here I have some discussion of motivation, which basically is along the lines of it allows us to be more supportive without having to stretch ourselves in supporting things within the core ourselves. And then I have some definitions of what I feel best defines a trusted project inside of a community source. I have some discussions in the implementation about how a project that's in the community would be able to propose itself to go into, that's not in the community could propose itself to go into the community, and then what it would need to get that pulled in. And then I also have some discussion down here around potentially hosting sort of a build solution to allow us to build secured artifacts for all of our repos so that there is a known safe place to download artifacts. Yeah, so that's kind of the gist. I'm more than willing to talk about it a little bit more if y'all want to have any questions right off the bat. But I figured I'd just give you a quick rundown so you all know what you're getting into when you go and check it out and leave comments on it. Take that silence as a good thing. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
This is awesome. Thanks, Forrest. Does this
actually, sorry, there's one more thing. That's my bad. This is just the first half of a sort of tandem set of RFCs that I want to get in, but they are a little disjoint from each other, so I separated them so I wouldn't sort of bottleneck one with the other. I also want to put in another RFC to discuss moving things that we feel are have become critical components in the community into core, so that we can put them as our part of our Paketo sort of offering and put them in our official artifacts. But that will be a separate RFC that comes later.
Cool. Couple questions on this. I'm going to add some comments as well, but I think this is a great first pass. Do we call out anywhere here what like the governance would look like of the community in the sense? What I'm thinking of is like all this tooling that we have. I think Steven and I had a like offline chat a bit about things like build packages and stuff like that. Who actually owns those artifacts published to say like Paketo community, Ruby and all? And we don't have to have an answer here, but just something to think about.
So is your question around like who owns the artifacts or where they're being hosted? Is that the idea? Maybe I misunderstood what you're saying.
That's the general question. So imagine like say Dan Makuza has a Rust build pack that we want to pull into Paketo community. Who owns the tooling around getting that build package onto GCR? Are we giving people like Dan Makuza access to that GCR location? Questions like that, I think that would be good to address.
Yeah, so I think that the general idea, at least one that I was going for when writing this, was initially we are basically going to say that while we sort of ensure levels of source code maintenance and cleanliness, we are not going to guarantee anything on an individual project's artifacts until we're able to set up a system that would allow us to control how artifacts are built so that we can have guarantees about the cleanliness of them, I guess. There's a better word for that, but I can't think of it right now. And then with that, we would, I think, basically have an entire build system to ourselves that would, if you become part of this community, to publish these artifacts, you go through our build system and our build system publishes those things for you. I think is the general idea that I want to go for, but that is something that I have not completely fleshed out in this RFC in particular.
That seems reasonable to me. I'll add some comments on this and we can work on this a little more.
Yeah, I'd be careful about making that a hard requirement. Just what we've seen in Cloud Foundry about making sure that you have to come into our build systems or even in the Spring team as well. Instead, making it a compelling offering, like an SRE kind of thing. Like you can write your own build system, but we've got this one that's already exists out of the box for you that'll automate it, so you don't have to spend the time. I think is a better carrot rather than the stick.
I think almost definitely. That's why it's kind of been left in its incomplete state at the moment, because I don't know what it'll look like.
I think the goal is less to make it easy for build pack authors that are contributing to Paketo to build build packs, and more to it's a feature for users of those build packs to know that the artifact they're getting is actually the thing that was built from the source code. So like it's a security feature. If we have a lower bar for entry into Paketo community or Paketo incubator or whatever we call it, where we're not doing extensive vetting, right, that would be required to enter the project proper, then having the source code get built automatically without the maintainers who we didn't vet, potentially random people on the internet creating those artifacts and publishing them, it's like that would be a big benefit. It would both be a carrot for people to join because they get some like semblance of like, oh, this is not going to be a piece of malware, right? To their users, right? And a benefit for users, and that they know that these things are safe. So, sorry, go ahead.
I'd be careful. The problem is making the bar too high, right? Like, it's pretty clear that Heroku's community, right, hasn't had a need for this. The people who choose to use certain things, aren't necessarily worried about it. I think this is a play towards, we expect at some point in the future enterprises to say, not only can you use anything from Paketo, but our internals can also use anything from Paketo community. And so, like, that is what the actual benefit to Buildpack developers is, but I don't think it's particularly strong, or I don't think it's a particular guarantee.
The Heroku community uses Buildpacks in Git repos, where like you can review what it's going to run before you use it, because they don't have artifacts. And so I was wondering if that, because our things tend to be in Go and precompiled as blobs of things that are on a registry, I was wondering if that changed it at all. But maybe
it may certainly change it. Like, the big concern I have here is if we make a bar very high and don't have a compelling enough offering for Buildpack developers, then we just end up with no one wanting to come into it.
I'm thinking more like you have to use GitHub Actions, right? Like, not you have to use this particular system we've designed to do packaging or anything like that. Just like the stuff that builds it, regardless of what it is, it can be whatever you want, has to be source code checked into the repo that is processed in an automated way. Not that it has to, like, just I'm not saying that alleviates the problem, just to clarify the
I don't think that was clear in Forrest's explanation. The idea of here is a pre-built build system and admittedly, Forrest, as you said, like, this is totally undefined what it means. I just want to call out the point that we actually have to compel Buildpack authors to come here, and every time you put up a new barrier, you must do X, is a strike against actually coming.
Makes sense. I'm not saying it's not a barrier. I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be a complex system. It could just be a rule that it has to be, reproduced by something. If that makes sense.
Yep, sounds good.
I think also as well, I'm more than willing to keep the requirement for a long time that you are allowed to attach any artifact that you want, with the understanding of, if you are truly paranoid, you have to go and compile the bits for yourself. I don't know. It seems like a really easy middle ground for us to hit.
It'd be interesting to see how this interacts with the Buildpack registry, like the centralized one that's being planned for CMB, because people are going to want, who are in here, to be publishing under the Paketo community namespace. And I'm sort of curious how we're going to control access to the credentials to the Paketo community namespace so people can publish from here to that registry.
That would be a reason why controlling the build of the Buildpack would, because then we could guarantee that it flows up to that location. That's the reason for the controlling the build, is that it would guarantee that it's coming, like, the artifact wasn't published by a random person. It was literally the source code in the repo built however the repo defines it to be built and published there when the source code is updated on a certain branch. Sorry.
So at that point, then, is the carrot that you are automatically put into the centralized Paketo community registry then?
Again, but it's not clear that having a Paketo community namespace is actually a compelling thing, right? Why wouldn't I just be nebhail / whatever thing I want to be? There has to be some other value to it. And, like, the easy one is if VMware can go to a commercial customer and say, we will also support, or we will also indemnify the code in Paketo community, right? Like, that's a very compelling reason to want to get in for quite a number of our partners, in fact. But it's not clear actually that VMware is going to do that. So other than we think Paketo is a good idea, why does random Buildpack developer want our namespace?
I think I view this like Docker trusted builds. Like on Docker Hub, there are some repos that have like a star next to them and say trusted build, where Docker Hub is building the Docker file for you. And, like, some people try to avoid things that aren't that because you don't know what they are. That's
Sure.
the
Yeah, absolutely. Like that is a good reason. It's unclear given the nascent build pack community whether that's actually something that is demanded today, right?
yeah, for sure. Definitely an open question around all that.
I was curious if we had sort of build packs or build pack authors in mind that is encouraging us to drive this out now. Like
Dan Makuza just recently released an entire Rust build pack set, which in his words is he can chill out as long as he wants to on this, but definitely got me more in the it's time to write this thing out.
And that's just under his namespace right now?
Yeah, it's currently just Dan Makuza / Rust or something like that, and on GitHub.
I think some of it's under Guillermo's GitHub too, or he reused one of Guillermo's build packs, so it's kind of like all over the place.
Might be an interesting person to talk to then, like when the build pack registry exists, so Dimakuza Rust is discoverable. What is still missing that would make him want to be part of Paketo community namespace, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a somewhat separate question, but possibly related, but like, do we have any docs or an RFC yet around like the promotion process? Like, how do we get something, I'm thinking like Ruby or Python, from Paketo community into like an officially supported thing that we can like market on our website and stuff?
That's another RFC that I want to, or if someone would like to take it from me, should try that in the near future. There was more of a demand in putting things in the community right now than there was promoting things out of it. So that's the first one I wrote.
Cool, makes sense. We can talk offline about that. I think there's a lot of pretty important to like try to tackle that pretty soon, since we have a fairly functional Ruby build pack now and things like that. So we could talk.
Chip reached out a while ago. I think Cash, have you mentioned this? About community being maybe not a great name for it because it implies that the rest of the project isn't community centric. It's like, oh, this is the community part. Well, who's maintaining this other stuff, right? Is that not maintained by a community of maintainers? It'd be hard to change the name, in the short term, but I think it's a good point. And Chip knows his community building techniques for open source projects. So I wonder if like incubator or sandbox or something like that makes.
We use experimental on the Spring side.
I don't know if that's a decision I don't really care to make. I have it in my bike shedding for, do we actually call this Paketo community? But as I've gone on record multiple times, I don't care what we call it. Whatever makes everyone else happy.
I spoke to Chip again after like we initially had that conversation, and like he's not super like particular about like doing this immediately. His feedback was more or less like, we've tried this in Cloud Foundry before, and this is sort of the feedback we received around that. So just something to keep in mind. I don't think it makes sense to do immediately because we've done, again, a lot of work past couple of months just moving things over and stuff like that. But if we hear more feedback around this, we could think about it.
I would prefer to make a migration sooner rather than later. I know that we just got done doing one, but we have a relatively small amount of resources around this currently. The less things to move, the better. Why unpack into the house if I'm going to have to move in 2 months?
Sure, but it's like unnecessary work, I guess, to prioritize at the moment. So I'm in favor of like, just keep going with stuff. If we hear something again in the next like month or so, we could pull this in.
All right. That's all I had for this. So
Okay.
yield my time.
Next one, project-wide standard for Buildpack verbose log output.
This one was me. I'm not entirely sure where I'm going here with this, but like I've ran into a couple instances recently where I'm doing things like running with the bundle install build pack, and my bundle install fails, and I have no way of debugging what happened because the build process isn't running bundle install with -- verbose. So what I'm wondering is if there's like some standard way or some flag or some environment variable or something that we can like use project wide, whether that's like Paketo or like CNB project as a whole, to do something like this. What I have in mind is like the pack verbose flag on the build should set like some environment variable that all build pack authors can just consume and use and have verbose logging output, because it's extremely hard to like debug what's going on right now on like say yarn install failing or bundle install or something like that. Have any other folks thought about this before, or like has the CNB project run into any of this?
Oh, we've definitely thought about this. There is a long-standing, never actually written RFC for structured logging, which would communicate the same kind of information through it, that basically a bi-directional piece of information, so that verbosity levels or logging levels are passed down into build packs, and build packs generate logging at different levels that is displayed, in various different ways in various different systems. It's a very hard problem. From the Java side, the way we've always handled this is we already have environment variables for configuring the arguments passed to various tools. So if you need to run Maven, there's an environment variable for Maven, the same thing for Gradle and any of the other things that we run. And so you have the flexibility at that point to describe a set of arguments that includes a verbose flag to Maven if you wanted to. And so you could imagine an environment variable for yarn install that maybe by default has no additional arguments, but in the cases where it does have, or a user can set that and put a -- verbose on that thing as well. We want to define logging levels either across CNB or we want to have input from the tools into the build packs is such a gigantic undertaking, both conceptually and adoption wise, that like it borders on impossible. Like getting pack to pass that kind of information in without also solving a broader structured logging kind of problem is just like it just doesn't happen realistically.
I think there's some decisions that we would want to make first, like, do we do structured logging? Do we do magic marker logging? Should build packs output everything and then that get refined by the pack CLI so that you can access the debug information after the build if you decided that you don't want to repeat it again with -v, or should build packs really make the decision as they're running? And so, I think it'd be great to start those conversations or kick off those conversations up again in the CNB project and have that trickle back down to either things build packs can read and make decisions on, or things that build packs can output with their output to be able to, have pack filter out the debug information.
Yeah,
I think it gets extra complicated when you're talking about tools that build packs invoke, right? So we could come up with some scheme where build pack can tell you like which pieces of its logging are verbose or info level, and you can show or hide things. Like that's hard, but it's possible. But saying I want to show and hide different log levels from NPM starts to verge into the impossible, because it might not be possible for every tool to separate the output that it's making at different levels in a way that you can filter in and out. Like you kind of have to make that decision up front whether you're going to run with those flags or not.
Got it. That makes sense. No, I just wanted to start like general conversation about this because I've just ran into this a lot as someone playing around with all the different build packs. It does seem to me though that since the Java folks already have some environment variables for this, it wouldn't be crazy for us to do something like this in all of the Paketo build packs that I don't know what we're calling is, but the feature engineering team like maintains, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, like, and I wouldn't approach it as here is how you enable verbose logging, right? Like it's a more general thing. How do I send arguments, or how do I, as an application developer, customize what arguments are actually passed when I run npm install or when I run yarn install, things like that.
So let's pretend we didn't want to launch 1,000 ships first. Should we just go ahead and maybe internally and then express it through some documentation, talk about what we do to set varying degrees of verbosity for just build packs in general? Is that maybe the best approach for us to take? And then if there is some higher level decision for the tooling, then we can adopt that, but maybe adoption of that will be easier, or should we just avoid this topic entirely?
Well, I'd be careful phrasing it in, here is some documentation for how we adjust verbosity, right?
Mm-hmm.
The documentation is, here is how you adjust the arguments that are passed to these tools instead. And verbosity is clearly one of the most common ones you'd ever want to do, right? But it is just a general purpose piece of functionality, I'd say.
Okay.
It does seem like, naively, if you added a BP log level or CNB log level that the build packs are supposed to respect and tune the args they send to the tools, you end up with a lot less transparency than having the developer set the different debug variables for the different tools they want to see more output from, right? Like philosophically, there's a little bit of a difference in like, do we want build packs to be a tool that makes it easy to build images using NPM, or do we want build packs to be a tool that installs NPM modules, however it happens, you know? And it seems like recently we feel more comfortable with the former thing than the latter thing.
I agree.
I don't know.
I've definitely come around in that evolution as well, from definitely exposing more of the underlying tool functionality to users to use as they see fit.
I think it follows along the modularity sort of philosophy that we're moving towards also.
Awesome. Well, I can take an action to just get the conversation going, well, at least on our build packs and like file issues, wherever, to try to expose some of this stuff.
Sounds great. Next one is modularization progress.
This is kind of a quick question, and I don't expect there to necessarily be an update on this, but last week we were talking about, there was like a chat about modularizing Ruby and like, you know, really breaking it down so there are different build packs for setting a, you know, start command the user is providing versus for different web servers. And we talked about how we could modularize the other build packs even more, like with, you know, should the npm build pack that runs npm install, should that set a start command? Probably not. That should be something else. I was wondering if that had progressed any further. It's probably something that's we're thinking about further down the road. I was just curious if there are any updates or conversations on it.
So if you go to the Go language families right now, there's an accepted RFC on a structure that we are adopting for the new sort of Go world. I think there may even be more on top of that, but this is our first iteration to make it more modular. And it involves sort of making the Go compile step its own build pack, and then also splitting up dep into getting the actual dep dependency and then running a dep ensure. So that's what we've proposed to do for Go. Go on.
Can I ask what the benefit of this is? Like, why wouldn't I want the same npm build pack to install my modules and set the start command?
Say you have a Ruby app and you install modules with it. It makes more sense if these things just do what they say they're going to do, right? npm runs npm install, and you can do whatever you want with those modules. If you want to set a start command from package.json, there's a separate build pack that does that one action. Feels like it's really moving in that direction of like really understanding what the build config does. Let you do a lot more interesting things with, like, say you want to install npm modules, precompile assets, and then host the JavaScript using Nginx, like super common use case for a front end app that we totally don't support right now. We tell people, go install npm locally, precompile your assets, and then build an image that just has the bundle of JavaScript next to it.
I feel like a different approach would be to sort of like make the build packs more configurable in some ways, rather than having all of that be broken down into modularization of the build packs. I think the reason that I worry it could go too far is that because for every build pack, you do need to have at least one binary, like either 2 for detect and build, or a single one if you're doing like a multi-call situation. But when you have a builder with hundreds of build packs, that actually ends up taking up quite a significant amount of space.
It seems like a problem we should solve. It shouldn't fight the modularity, if that makes sense. Like, if we need to make it so a build, you can use one build pack, spin build, and symlink it to another build pack and provide it a different argument, that feels like a problem we should solve that way.
I'm generally in favor of modularity, but I think it could go to, don't want to take it into the ad absurdum extreme, right? Where like every single command that gets run is a separate build pack.
Yeah, like as a member of a team that already has to manage 50 of these things, like the complexity is no joke. There may be benefit, but do not think that like adding the modularity is a free win here. The cognitive complexity, the number of pipelines you've got to manage, like all of it has a cost, and you want to make sure that you're balancing those two things, certainly.
I think for us, the primary concern is around when you choose to put layers in the actual run image. And if you have something like the NPM build pack that is used in some cases purely in the build phase, and then in other cases in the build phase and possibly at launch, then that you're having to go to every build pack that might have this situation and provide like configurable toggles to say, this, I don't want you to put any of these layers into the image at runtime because I'm only using this during build. And so I think that like what we've ended up doing is trying to separate the portions of build packs that know for a fact something is needed during build versus those portions of the build pack that know for a fact something is needed during launch, with an eye towards trying to make efficient actual run images that don't have extra dependencies that aren't necessarily needed.
How does that get solved by breaking it up more? I guess is my question, because you still need to at some point to detect whether the smaller modular piece is going to run or not, unless you're having users very explicitly say which build packs are running, which then requires them to know a lot about how the different pieces fit together.
So by separating the portion that is like the install process of, say, NPM, like executing the NPM install process, from the portion of the build pack that says set the start command for this app to be like NPM start. By separating those two, I can basically just say that I only, for the NPM install build pack, if it's only running NPM install during the build phase, I can say to the Node Engine build pack, I only require Node during build. And I can, like, in my build plan requirement, say that I only need this thing during build. And then if something downstream then also says, actually, I need Node Engine also during launch, then like we can ensure that it's available both in build and launch. But for most cases, if someone is just using the NPM install build pack by itself, we can ensure that it's available for that build pack during build, but not necessarily ending up in the launch image, hopefully meaning that the image is more efficient in terms of the actual layers that end up on the actual run image. So for us, it's about like separating the two. Like if you separate those two concerns, that's one way of building in the separation of configuration. Alternatively, you could go to all the build packs that have these types of concerns and build toggles for them to say, like, please don't attach a start command to this particular thing.
I think another thing that we were also trying to drive out with this as well is, say that we we install some like yarn or something like that, there may be a situation in which there is a very custom yarn build that someone wants to use. So by also attaching that to the same build pack that we run something like a yarn install on, we've kind of had to push everything, like we'd have to make that entire build process configurable somehow, as opposed to just sort of allowing the user to define what they want their process to be through some other means or some other build pack. I think is another concern that we were trying to, not solve for, but address.
Just from a user perspective, the level of modularity we're talking about doesn't feel ad absurdum to me. It feels like it's taking individual actions the user would think about when they're building an application and making them very high level, right? So that they're composable. It feels very single responsibility principle in its design, sort of, which I like a lot. But definitely makes sense to, make sure that we're not modularizing to an unnecessary extent. Agree with that.
Thanks for the explanations. Just playing the devil's advocate over here.
Cool. That was all. That was my only question. Just curious about where we were there. I'll take a look at the GAR. See, it looks really interesting.
Okay, I think that's it. Anybody else have anything to talk about today?
Yes, everybody.
No, thanks. Have a good day.